Ladies and gentlemen,
Hi Neil, how are you?
Hey Mark, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for joining me this evening. Really delighted that you're going to be coming over to the festival. Um, so just to get us underway, sort of briefly discuss sort of the areas that we might cover today. Um, who would you say is a huge inspiration? It could be multiple people. What's the sort of thing that or what's the sort of improv that really makes you smile, makes you kind of go, oh, that's so nice. What's the what, where, what's the thing?
God, how long is a piece of string? Well, I suppose, and I'm always careful about name dropping because we get into that zone of name. But okay, you asked the question, so I will answer it. I suppose there has been multiple. John Kramer of the Maydays had a very profound influence on me, as he did many people, in terms of how he approached teaching, and I suppose the inspiration, encouragement, and insight that he gave. It gave me and many others with his teaching. From a performance perspective, I mean, I could say the TJ and Dave's, the King Tens of the world, and all that. I do want to mention Project Two, which when I first saw it was Katie Shute, Chris Mead, and Jonathan Monkhouse, and it was a trio, and then it was a duo then for a while. But that remains one of my favorite improv shows. And for anyone who doesn't know, it's basically science fiction improv. It's grounded relationship based improv. When they do it as a duo, I always say it's as close to DJ and Dave you're going to get a British accents. So really profoundly powerful, but not silly. It's not monkey in the closets improv, as I often say. It's very grounded, very authentic, but satisfies the itch of any science fiction fan when watching it. Just really good improv, and never disappoints. So they're highly influential, and I suppose. From the perspective of me doing Neil Plus One, I can't not mention Matt Holmes. Matt Holmes does a show called Mad And in Philadelphia, and he'd been working with audience members for quite some time before me, and he was actually incredibly encouraging to me. When I started my journey, and very helpful, and very much a solid guy in that sphere. He'd certainly be my go-to person if I wanted to chat something, talk something about that genre or that aspect of improv. So I mean, I could name a million more,
Well,
but
I
I'm
think
going to.
he gave us a number of headliners there. So,
Yeah,
yeah. We're very fortunate to have Chris come over and play as part of the
yeah.
ensemble as well. So
Hmm.
he'll be up for some of the festival, which be amazing. And obviously Katie's coming to Liverpool actually in a couple of weeks to do a workshop that David's organised. So we'll get the benefit of her great knowledge, and obviously her book's amazing. So it is
Yes,
it's a go-to for long formers now, which is brilliant. Um,
definitely.
in terms of playing with another audience or playing with another audience member, um, that's a real skill in terms of being able to make them the star and pull out stuff. How did you develop that piece of work, Neil Plus One?
Well, there was kind of two aspects to it. One, just to get it out of the way, I wanted to develop a show that I could travel with. I used to do a lot back before I was kind of teaching improv full time, back in the corporate days, as we say. I wanted a show I could travel with, and it's difficult when you're in an ensemble. It's even difficult when you're in a duo if you haven't got somebody who has got those resources. So having a solo show as such is a very obvious thing. But more importantly was I always felt and still do that improv is riddled in, I suppose, cliched sound bites and quotes that often lack the depth of understanding, particularly for people new to improv. So you think about when we start improv, we're told, oh, it's not about you, just make your scene partner look good, and just yes and everything. We're told all these things, and then sometimes you'll often hear of, well, we teach you these rules just so you can unlearn them then afterwards. So that kind of undermines all these great quotes that we give. But it actually made me stop and think and say, well, what does that actually mean in tangible terms? I'm big into tangibleness when it comes to teaching. If it's not about me and it's about making my scene partner look good, then it really shouldn't matter if I'm performing with Katie Shute or Chris Mead, or I'm performing with Pat the baker down the street who's never been on inside a theater in his life. It really shouldn't matter. And also that experience, which we've all encountered in improv workshops, when you're there and you want to have a good workshop, you want to have a good time, but there's that loose cannon in the workshop. You know the person. When they get up and do scenes, it's like, oh my God, how can I work that person? They're unpredictable. And then when the teacher say I need two people to jump up for a scene, and that person puts up their hand, and you get that kind of lull in the audience, no one's jumping up, and then again it brings it back to why do we do that? So I suppose I know you kind of said the thing of working with an audience member being a skill in itself, but to me, it's no different than working with any improviser to a certain extent. I've performed with veteran improvisers and seasoned improvisers that certainly can bring an element of unpredictability to their work on stage. And we've all worked with inexperienced improvisers as well who are still learning their way. And so there's always that element of unpredictability. And I'd kind of counter argue to people there is one thing particularly predictable about non-improviser audience members in that they don't know what they're doing. And that is predictable, if that makes sense.
I can.
So that brings a sense of zen to it all, of kind of a yin to the yang, so to speak. But it is challenging, and that's why I continue to. I'm doing the show. What I think this is the year 13 now we're going into, and I continue to because it does continue to bring a challenge to me, and it's a nice reminder to me of I suppose the humbleness we need in the art form, but also the excitingness of it. There's no two shows really are ever the same. I know that's a see I'm giving you a cliche, Mark, after I said I don't like cliches, but there really is that sense of is it drama tonight? Is it comedy? Is it a mix of both? Where's this going to take us? And that's still exciting for me.
So you like to play with hand grenades.
I wouldn't call it that at all. Maybe a pressure cooker,
Yeah.
it gets hot and steamy in there, but it'll taste good at the end.
No,
Yeah.
I completely understand. We in the ensemble that I work with, we always ensure that we have someone who we call the loose cannon.
Mm,
Um, just because otherwise, if everyone's playing, not necessarily playing nicely, but if everyone's you kind of get into potentially predictable patterns, you know that someone is going to disrupt, which then means it forces people to stay in the moment and and generally
mm.
kind of go, okay, where's this going?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I kind of completely get that. Although working with a member of the public, you kind of not necessarily always sure what's going to come out. Um, we developed a show for children, where the children come up and they have a similar sort of relationship where they become the protagonist of their own sort of hero quest journey, and
Mm.
that's really interesting. But it's what comes out is just like you just do not know, and that is very exciting. I'm not sure if I'd want to be on the end of that. There are other people who are much more comfortable, perhaps working. Maybe I just don't like people. That's maybe the thing. Maybe what we've discovered is actually you're the far more personable.
But there is it's that Oscar Wilde thing of we're all stars. Everyone's a star. They may never have taken an acting or course or an improv course before workshop, but we all have that kind of urge inside to be to be a performer, to tell our story. And like to me, I've always been drawn to narrative based, grounded, relationship based improv. We're telling stories, and we can do that with audience members. And don't get me wrong, there's been some shows over the years where I've actually had to say to the person afterwards, did you lie? Have you really done a workshop or an acting course before? And when they turn to me and say, no, I genuinely haven't, that makes go, wow, well, there's it in action. There's something bubbling under the surface there. But that's what it's all about, really, isn't the
I
stories you
guess you
tell?
get that authentic response, which is kind of the secret to improv, which is, you want what is immediately in someone's brain just to come out. And
Yeah.
if that's the structure and the boundary that's been created, then you kind of have somebody who's kind of very open. I don't have to be funny.
Mm.
I just have to be honest and react, which is
Exactly.
which
Yeah.
is perfect. So
And,
yeah,
and no different than if you and I were to do a show, we're creating a safe space. You
yeah,
know, if the person feels comfortable, it makes it far easier for them to lean in, and they may still be nervous, but they feel safe in that
yeah.
small space on stage. So that's very important.
So, talking of huge themes in terms of searching for love, what have you discovered over the years? What are some of the highlights of people's great thoughts on love?
Well, I suppose Cafe Amour is relatively new as a show in its own right, but it is part of that the brand of Neo Plus One. So when there are shows themed around love, everybody has had good and bad relationships. You know, everyone has the story of the fish that got away, or that one heartache that they thought they'd never get over, or indeed there's the people who make you sick, telling you about how wonderful the love of their life is. So we all have it's definitely one thing we could all sit around with a pint or a coffee and talk about. Well, here's my story,
Yeah.
and that's the nature of life. Really, is love, isn't it? God, that sounds so corny, but that's our connection with each other. So yeah, I mean, I've had some interesting experience in that topic, where people just opened up and revealed so much about themselves through performance. Not too long ago, I did a show with a lady, a show in Barcelona a number of years ago, where it wasn't a Cafe Amour show, but it was an E plus one. So meaning that the topic was not picked or there wasn't a particular team. But the chap I got out of the audience, he wasn't a native Spaniard. He was a non-national. He had moved to Barcelona, but he had just come out of a long-term relationship, and the ending of the relationship was not very pleasant. It was not very nice, shall we say. And then as we were chatting and he was revealing this, I could see this is actually very recent as well. So before we even started performing, we were just chatting as part of the show in front of the audience. The audience were moved by his story. It was very sad. So it was impossible at that point for me not to incorporate some of that as inspiration in the show. And it wasn't a replication of his life or anything like that. But we had a scenario where he was dating somebody, and he dumped that person in the show. So he dumped me effectively, and the audience erupted. It was a moment of liberation and exhilaration for the audience and for us all, and it was great. It was a great moment. It was like a penalty kick in the World Cup final. But then later in the show, I decided, let's see what happens if I reintroduce the person he's dumped. And so that person came back on the scene and he reconciled with me and got back together. And it was such a sad scene for me that I was so emotionally moved. I kind of stopped talking, because I was so saddened by it. And there was people in the audience that were crying as well. Now he had a blast. I suppose he didn't see the emotional weight as a non-improviser he had brought to the show through that authenticity and truth. And I have to point out, he was in a safe space throughout the show. This was not anything. This was not Jeremy Kyle or anything like that. He had a ball afterwards. He really grateful for the opportunity and experience. But we were so moved. I was moved as his co-star. The audience were moved. And that was wonderful, though. When I look back on it, it was so wonderful that improv, gave us that experience. And most importantly, someone with no skills, no training, who had never come across Yes and before, gave us that experience. And that was really, really nice.
Fabulous. So there's going to be a nil plus one book of all the almost like you need the wraparound now. You need the
Yeah,
whole.
it's a work in progress. It is a work in progress. I suppose I kind of came to the realization that, yeah, there is something I'm doing that people do talk and ask me about, so maybe I should put pen to paper and share my insights. No, by no means expertise, but share my insights on what I've learned and my approach in that. And I think separate to me, I think that's important. Kind of getting back to your point about unpredictable and predictable in improv. It's kind of funny in one sense with improv in that we celebrate that we're very creative on stage and we're spontaneous, but we're still doing the formats that we're still in many formats that have been around for decades. And I always say to people, do find your tribe and find your personality within improv, and create shows, create formats, create concepts that you'd like to try that are different. And I think that's quite important for us in improv. I found it through this particular to this immersive interactive theater. And other people, Chris Mead, who we mentioned, he's fantastic for creating shows and concepts. And I think that's important for a lot of people to kind of think about. Maybe step away from doing those formats that you've learned from other people and try and find your own thing within that. I think that's important for us, and it's good to elevate the art form in that way as well.
Well, I always go back to sort of Dal Close, you know, kind of post Compass players and kind of starting to this emergent idea of the Herald,
Mm.
which has sort of become this sort of dominant form, and obviously most things seem to, but often we forget Paul Sills and story time, which is kind of what I really like. It's not necessarily taking known stories and then kind of improvising off those, but kind of I think there's a level of I'm currently writing something for work around this subject area, sort of like the kind of North American bias, perception, and kind of the formats where you kind of go, well, it's actually like 60 years old or 50 years old. Why are we not kind of looking at something else? And I think sort of if you look at the first wave of books, kind of there is theatre in the title. You look at the second, third wave, theatre's removed, although lots of the books kind of are advocating for theatre without using that. So I think
Mm,
for me at the moment, I'm kind of really sort of drilling down into kind of go, okay, the show is spontaneous. It doesn't have to be comedy. We don't have to use ask clause. And what we're looking for is very much grounded relationships um, in a location, and see what happens, because I think it's inherent. If you go back and look at the royal family, essentially it feels like it's improvised, but it's one location and it's just a group of grounded, and that's kind of the anchor point I'm talking about, is kind of going, why can't we do that and watch that on stage? Because for
mm.
me, that's inherently fascinating, funny and moving all at once. So I think there is,
Ye-
we're kind of sort of segueing into where you think improv might be moving towards, but I generally do think that kind of movement to sort of layer layer improv um, with other things,
mm,
and I think that, or certainly from my perspective, that's kind of where I see myself. So I started off doing organic improv from John and Todd, who had a company called Burn Manhattan, and they did a show with Shira Piven, and it was kind of like there is no ask for. So I wasn't ever taught the rules. I never did an
mm,
improv class. I would just turned up, and the kind of we just did we just went, oh, we're just going to do this,
mm.
and it was really fascinating because everybody sort of talks about these rules, and I kind of go, well, I didn't experience them, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I was just kind of going, well, I just want to make work that people can kind of either connect with, and that can be laughter or tears, or they kind of gasp, or they get angry about it. Um, but really, I think where we're, or what certainly what I think is try to move, or I'm trying to move away from humor or comedy being the goal, um, as and it become more of an event where there is a potential roller coaster of emotions, which is generally kind of look at comedy theory around the idea of tension and release. If you don't have, if there's no tension, there is no release. It just becomes very subtly less and less laughter, and kind of going, that was cerebral, that was humorous. What
Mm,
you really, or what I'm aiming for, is to kind of get that big belly laugh where people laugh uncontrollably and just cry
mm.
with laughter. Which is more satisfying? I don't know,
Yes. I,
but
I, I agree. And you've touched on a couple of things there. First of all, let's take the Harold, for example. It's a contentious issue talking about the Harold openly in the improv world. It's a bit like talking about religion at the dinner table at Christmas time. Um, it's a format that's been around a very long time. It definitely serves its purpose. There was it there was an article written by, was it Will Hines wrote the article about the Harold? It was very controversial. I can't remember the name of the article now, but a very insightful article about the Harold and its uses, and is it still valid, and all of that. And it kind of, there is an element with those traditional formats of they have been around a long time and they have very much served their purpose, but they're this kind of holy grail of we don't touch them, we don't talk down about them, and I'm certainly not doing that. But then the other thing that we get hung up, which I've noticed, in fact, in the era of social media where people talk about improv online, is the hang up on words. Improv comedy. I don't say improv comedy anymore because then you're sending a message to the audience that this is definitely improv comedy with the emphasis on comedy. But I'm performing comedy, it's the thing of improviser. So I'm not a comedian, I'm an improviser. I'm performing comedy, but I don't particularly want to have that label on it because if something dramatic happens, I want to have that kind of that cushion of knowing that's something that I want to go towards. It's the art brings it to life. Comedy is the byproduct, drama is the byproduct of what we're doing, particularly if we're doing relationship based stuff. But in terms of the future and where we're going, definitely, I loved organic improv when I was learning that. Loved it. I know plenty of people that hate it, and that's okay. A part of my journey, which kind of informs into the future, was I, did a lot of training internationally. I worked with a lot of teachers, but I never, not living in the US, I didn't have the opportunity to do a 6 month conservatory program or anything like that. When it came round to me saying, okay, Joe, I'm going to do an IO intensive or something like that, I was at the point where nameless to me, Neil, that you're beyond that now. It's not, maybe look at doing something else. So I'd taken so much courses of varying lengths with different teachers. So it became, the analogy I use is I became a little bit like Batman's utility belt. You take a workshop or a course with one teacher or school, take the bits that you like and that you want to use, put that at the front of your utility belt, and the shark repellent for that time you're fighting the shark in the 1960s Batman, maybe leave that spray at the back of your utility belt because it's not going to get used that often. And that's kind of how I see improv. It's like sport, so many different aspects and approaches and styles, and all of them are great, but do lean into the one that you enjoy the most, no matter what that is. But when it comes to the future, I do think, certainly from a European perspective, where I feel, I'm going to get into trouble for this now, Mark, where I feel we perhaps have the edge is that innovative approach to creating different approaches, concepts, and styles. I can hear the haters commenting on this, and I credit that not as a yay Europe improv, but I credit that because I suppose traditionally Europe has a huge theatrical influence, and so it's a natural leaning. Um, and because we don't have a vast majority of countries in Europe don't have, and I suppose outside of the US don't have, in that's kind of grounded, staple, traditional improv theater. It's meant that many people have had similar journeys, I guess, to myself, and so on. But we have definitely seen in recent years that emergence of I'm going to forge my path. This is what I want to do, and that's where I think the future of elevating the art form is. I'm going to say this very much tongue in cheek because I never met Del Close, and if I had, he probably wouldn't have liked me as a student and would have kicked me out of his class. But to your point, if Del Close came back today and looked at improv and saw we were still doing these formats, what would he think? I'm sure he'd be chuffed that we're still doing it, but there's probably a part of him that's going, really? Are we still doing that? What's new and different? What have we added? I'm sure someone who knows trained in him is going to say, no, Neil, he wouldn't say that. But I think it's a fair question to ask. And just another thing about it, you come across this: the Keith Johnstone versus the Del Close approach to improv. Does it really matter? I saw a couple of people recently online actually having a little bit snipes at each other over, and it's like, lads, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. From an audience perspective, the audience does not know if you're doing a Harold. They do not know if you're doing an Armando. And even if you tell them, they don't care. They want to be entertained. They want to be affected. They want to laugh. They want to be moved. They want all these things. If you tell them it's an improv comedy show, their expectation is they're going to be laughed. If you tell them it's an improvised theater show, their expectation is maybe be laugh, maybe moved, and so on and so forth. That's what matters to them. They don't care about the rest. The rest is the weeds.
Which is absolutely music to my ears. It sounds like we're on a very similar wavelength because I'm kind of going, no one I don't care if it's a la ronde. It means I don't generally don't care. Just I think the biggest issue I have with improv is they don't the audience isn't fully considered in its conception
Mm.
and its actual um application. So what I mean is that it actually becomes more of an event for the improvisers than it is for the audience. And
I agree, and do you know what? Funnily enough, I think the more often than not, short form is probably the only one at times that is catered for the audience because that we are all clear on what the purpose of short form is. When we're in front of an audience, we're there to have fun and make the audience laugh, and that social contract is abundantly clear. But the lines blur. You're absolutely right. Lines blur. But other aspects of performance and improv, they can blur. Do you know, Mark, I can hear the haters already. Who do you think you are, Neil?
No, but
uh,
also, I think I think if people don't speak up or don't have these, and I know, I did a session on Saturday where I was saying fairly similar things, which is, you don't have to align yourself to a particular school of thought.
no,
Be like a magpie. Take the shiny bits that speak to you, and you don't have to, you know, put them together, create a new hybrid, a mashup of something, and try it out. Ultimately, you know, um, it may not work, but who cares? You know,
yeah, yeah,
the in the concept and the creation stage as an ensemble, you will learn so much,
mm,
just in doing that. And something else, how many inventions or experiments were not successful, but they discovered something else as a result.
mm,
And you kind of go, well, actually, if you never try and if you never, and you always kind of, and that's the thing I always kind of go, is it inspiration or imitation? Um,
yeah,
and that's the question that people have to ask. You kind of going, am I looking to historically recreate something? Then it's not, there's no ownership. So
mm,
you've got to make it sort of tailor for you, um, your ensemble or whomever you're working with. But the most important thing is the audience. And you have to really consider, like you said, the social contract. What are the boundaries? How am I supposed to potentially watch or experience this? And if you're not clear, people then confused. What is it? Am I
mm,
also I generally last year it came from a suggestion in 2023 of there were quite a few people who were really nervous about being asked questions or ask fors.
mm,
Um, and so we put a traffic light system in for the audience. So all we did was have like a red sticker. Don't ask me questions in performance. We have an amber. Um, you can ask me, but if I don't speak, move on to somebody else. And then we've got green. I'm ready to play if you wish.
mm,
And actually, the amount of people that utilize. I mean, I was kind of like, I was sort of, I was going, well, we'll test it. We'll try it. I'm not really sure. Blah 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 blah. And so many people who came out with red stickers afterwards, kind of in the feedback, went, "Oh, it was so good. I just could relax in the show
mm,
and know that I'm not going to be what they described as picked on." So
mm,
I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So um, the show Taxi Tales that we're going to be testing next week in advance of the ensemble, we're not having any ask fors because we want to take the pressure away from the
mm,
audience. There is no um, sort of interactivity. You're going to watch
yeah.
a sort of moody noir esque um, sort of urban, grimy a tale of taxi drivers and passengers, essentially. So, so I think sometimes people are bit too scared to put their head above the parapet and have an opinion. Doesn't necessarily mean your opinion's right, and other people are quite, but it doesn't necessarily be. It's this way or the highway, and I always find that
Yeah,
rather,
and like the ask fors are interesting because why do we ask for suggestions? Well, we ask for suggestions to prove to the audience we're making it up. Is that really what our shows are about? Hey, no matter what happens, I'm making this up. I think we're beyond that at this stage.
yeah,
And Brian James O'Connell has an interesting take on ask fors and setting expectations for the audience. He used to always say, ask the audience for a line of poetry or ask them for a line of prose. So you're setting expectation with the audience. This is where we're at with the art form. This is
yeah,
where and I think that's great. I think that's brilliant. But Jen, the ask for is we're just proving to the audience we're making it up. We're well established in the arts now as to what improv is. I don't think we necessarily need to do that. And I always find, I don't know, sometimes I can remember doing shows, I get the suggestion, and then I forget what the suggestion was. I can't remember by the end. And I'm pretty sure if I forgot, the audience has forgotten as well. And the other thing, though, as well, is like, particularly when we're starting out in the journey, the ask for us is the worst part because, okay, can we get a word to inspire us? Okay, cauliflower. And immediately someone walks on. They're a cauliflower farmer and they're holding cauliflower. Oh God, if we don't harvest the cauliflower. So the infinite possibilities of an improv show are now whittled down to just one thing. And it kind of holds us back then as well. So yeah, the philosophy of ask for are interesting.
well, they just become very limiting.
Mm,
It's kind of like, oh, that's not really that. It's not A, not inspiring, and you're right. It just kind of go, we are improvising. You just say at the top, everything you see tonight is going to be improvised. That's it.
mm,
We know.
yeah,
That's the contract. Let's
yeah,
carry on. Let's crack on.
yeah,
Even if you just use a dictionary and just skim through a dictionary, take a and then I don't know, you take a word and then you look at its noun, pronoun, all those sort of things.
yeah,
Its adjective, verb. You kind of go, well, that's probably more exciting than
yeah, yeah,
than than what somebody's immediately just come up with or just had for their tea.
yeah, 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 exactly, exactly.
Okay, so um, Neil, what would be your what would be your if you had won the Euro lottery, the national lottery, or whatever the equivalent is, and you had won a load of money, what would you do with it?
What I do with it, God, I'd pro I'd probably buy an island. I no, I suppose if I was to do something in property, I would. Property is so expensive in Ireland. So I would probably then purchase a space that I could, a dedicated space for improv, an improv theater as such. But I'm definitely at the point in my life in terms of age and experience on my improv journey that it would be set up in the way that I want to do it, run by an authoritarian uh, view. But yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche to say that, but it is. I think there's none of it. There's very few improvisers that don't have that as a dream or ambition. Property market, commercial or otherwise, is insane in Ireland, and it's near impossible to get um, a financially equitable lease somewhere, unless you've got other things going on. So it's probably a pipe dream, unless that lottery. And probably not an Irish lottery win. We're talking Euro Millions win, probably to do
Yeah.
that. Never mind the Irish lottery.
Yeah, it's now not no longer the national lottery. It's the Euro lot. It's the Euro
It's the Euro
Millions.
Millions. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's well we share a my dream has always been to run a is have a small venue and then some studios and kind of and let somebody else take on the mantle. I'll deal with the books in the background and maybe drop in and do some teaching. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Neil. That was absolutely brilliant. We can't wait to have you come over to Liverpool and bring Neil plus one Cafe Amour, and we can find out who will be our superstar fella, the performer that emerges from the audience. I know there will be a lot of people who'll be going, okay, like pick me, pick me, pick me. But yeah, we can't wait to have you. Um, Come over and share your expertise in your teaching and to see your work. So yeah, we're very excited to be hosting you. So
Thank you very much. Looking forward to it. Very excited. So thank you for the opportunity. It's gonna be fun.
you're very welcome.